Good afternoon and welcome back from Vilnius, Lithuania. We're still at the Forum on the Future of Democracy, and I'm about to do my third interview of today. My name is Stollmeyer. I'm the founder and executive director of Defend Democracy. My third guest today is Ayesha Malette, and Ayesha is the director of the Democracy Division of Canada's Office of Human Rights, Freedom and Inclusion. Welcome, Ayesha.
Thank you for having me.
For our viewers, can you tell us a bit more about yourself and about your work?
With pleasure. First of all, thank you so much, Alice, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. This is my first time at the Vilnius Forum on the Future of Democracy, and it's been a really fascinating experience. A little bit about myself. I am a career public servant. I've been with the federal government in Canada for about 15 years now in a variety of different roles with expanding responsibilities and files. For the last 2 years, I've been with Canada's Ministry of Foreign Affairs as the director of the Democracy Division, which I'm biased, but I think is the best title and best job to have in the government of Canada. But before that, I have had roles within our national security institutions at Public Safety Canada and within the Privy Council Office, which is the nonpartisan office that supports the Prime Minister of Canada on questions related to intergovernmental affairs and democratic institutions.
Sounds great. And I think it's a pretty title indeed. So, as we are here in Vilnius, Lithuania, at the Forum on the Future of Democracy, what does democracy mean to you, both personally and professionally?
I'll start with the professional side because I think that is an important groundwork for the work that we do. I'm relatively new to this role, but a long-standing believer in democracy. And for me, when I think about democracy in the context of the work that I do, it really is about supporting the voice of the people, to be able to express their opinions without fear of repression, to be able to hold governments to account, whether it's through journalism, whether it's through access to information requests and open government, whether it's about being able to engage in discussions around the policy questions that a country is tackling. And it's really about agency, about personal agency that people have to set the future of their country in the right way. Of course, there are tons of institutions that underpin that, whether it's free and fair elections overseen by public servants like myself, good governance, access to services that are efficient, that are free of corruption, just a feeling of engagement that people have about the future of their country. So that's the professional side. On the personal side, both as a person who works to ensure that in Canada, Canadians feel like they can talk to us, that they can engage with their government, has been really meaningful because I firmly believe that democracy is not just something we should tackle or tend to every year or every 4 years through elections. Democracy is a daily and ongoing process, whether it's about your engagement in your community, whether it's about engagement with, in your volunteer activities, how you talk about your country, how you project the values that are important, that are about inclusion, that are about diversity, that are about hearing other voices, being able to dialogue. And those are things that I carry in my personal life as well.
And I very much agree that I often say that democracy is like a marriage, and it's something that you need to work on every day to keep it healthy. Absolutely.
And in similar metaphor, every garden needs water, it needs fertilizer, it needs care. And it's really important to not forget how fragile it can be. And my work has exposed me to that more so when I look at the state of democracy around the world, where we've all seen the same statistics coming out of Freedom House or about from VDEM talking about how there are more people on this planet living in closed or autocratic regimes than there are people living in democracies at this point in time. 5.7 billion people on this planet are living in closed or closing government or autocratic regimes at this moment. And there are other reports that talk about diminishing or closing civic spaces. So even the ability of people to question their government, to hold them to account, to ask for information that they should be entitled to as citizens is diminishing. And that's happening both online and offline. Mm-hmm. And so it reminds me that this is a very fragile privilege that I have as a Canadian, and one that I want to help ensure that other people around the planet get as well.
And thank you for your work. So, Ayesha, you're working as a diplomat now, so that means focusing on democracy in other countries. But you've also worked on democracy at home in Canada. Can you tell us more about that?
With pleasure. So prior to taking on a role with our foreign ministry, I mentioned I was with the Privy Council office, which has as part of its mandate to support Canadian democratic institutions. This includes our structures domestically. And so for 2 years, I had the privilege of leading the efforts to develop a plan to counter foreign interference in our Canadian elections. This was in 2019. We were seeing a growing trend of interference in elections around the world, and Canada wanted to be prepared. And so over the course of that time, and with support from so many people across multiple departments, with stakeholders outside of government, with activists, with citizens, we developed a plan to counter foreign interference in our Canadian elections. And it had 4 pillars. The plan still has 4 pillars. First pillar was really focused on citizens and building their resilience to misinformation, to disinformation, helping them be literate and media savvy so that they know what they're looking at and they can ask the right questions about what this information is intended to elicit in terms of emotions, where it's coming from, is it accurate, is it current, all the questions that we need citizens to play a role in countering mis and disinformation. We're trying to build that sense within Canadians. So a big focus on citizens was our first pillar. A second pillar was really focused on the institutions and organizations within government. This includes our political parties, who are such a critical element of democracy, particularly in Canada, about our public institutions, our public government, public administration organizations, to help us internally understand and be prepared to deal with any instances of foreign interference, both in terms of identifying it and also in responding to it. Canada put out some really innovative reports at that time explaining what online mis and disinformation could look like from within our cyber institutions and our cybersecurity agencies, as well as what it looks like offline and what countries are most commonly perpetrating that kind of activity. These are publicly available reports that folks can read. But that second pillar was really focused on looking at our institutions and building resilience and support within those institutions. No plan to counter foreign interference can ignore the vital role that social media and big tech platforms have to play. So a third pillar really focused on engaging them in voluntary measures to protect our elections. And then the final pillar, which is now where I spend a lot of my energy and time, was around engaging with international partners who are also dealing with the same types of issues to build mutual understanding and to share best practices and to learn from one another about what works and what doesn't work in terms of how to counter questions and issues of foreign interference. That plan has remained in place, of course, with multiple updates since I've left, but it's one of the things that I really find has been a powerful moment in my career to be able to contribute to the democracy in Canada.
Yeah, sounds great. And so it's ready for the next elections?
It was used in the 2019 election and has been used in subsequent elections. We at the end of the electoral cycle in 2019, reports were published, independent reports looking back at the election to confirm to Canadians, which I think was critical, that nothing had met the threshold of was considered foreign interference in our 2019 elections. And of course, we've had elections in the interim since then, and those reports continue to be published to confirm to Canadians and help build their confidence and trust that their institutions are vigilant in looking out for foreign interference in elections.
Yeah, great. in your earlier work, you also focused on security. Now, how does security relate to democracy, and have the two become more closely linked in the recent years?
Yeah, so my team within Global Affairs is housed within the International Security branch of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I don't think that's an accident. I think it's clear that democracies, and there's evidence to show that democracies are more stable, there is less conflict, there is more focus on the long-term pervasive issues that are affecting us globally, and that safety and security and economic prosperity is essential and critical to national security. So I think it's very, the issues of democracy and national security are very closely interlinked, because one is the foundation for the other and vice versa. Where I think we've seen issue in other parts of the world is where the agencies or elements of national security play a very heavy-handed role in protecting or defending democracy. And that, I think, is a balance that every country really needs to be careful in sending a good balance. Because my time was focused on questions of critical infrastructure and national security in Canada. And I think where there is space for dissent, for peaceful dissent, for protest, for Canadians to engage in questions around democracy, you can strike an excellent balance between having national security and security.
Mm-hmm. And has the relation between democracy and security changed over the last years? I mean, given the geopolitical situation?
I think it absolutely has. My sense is that there is, just that close linkage is resulting in thinking about democracy as one of the inputs or drivers for security, and that connection is being made much more clearly. We are living in a very fraught and complicated geopolitical time. A lot of balance of power has shifted. We look to our multilateral institutions for support and guidance, and we're seeing huge efforts to undermine our rules-based international system, one that has underpinned the way the world has worked for a long time successfully with a lot of positive outcomes. But it is becoming absolutely more intertwined and more fraught. And so when I think about democracy and democracy under threat, I see some of the internal pressures I've already referenced. I see some of these external pressures that are coming from other countries in the world that are also pushing their own approaches or disagreement around democracy and very strong authoritarian narratives. And then, of course, there's the digital piece as well. And that is the one that underpins both the internal and external threats, and it's a vector for how that work is done.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. So we're already at our last question. Time flies. It's such a great conversation. If there is one message or thought that you would like our viewers to remind of either our conversation or the forum of today or on democracy in general, what would that thought or message be?
Yeah, that is a great question. So this is my first time at the forum on the future of democracy. And what has become very evident to me over the course of these last few days here, and in discussing with journalists, with activists who are here, with representatives of different governments, is just that we cannot take democracy for granted. Coming back to the earlier point that we were sort of talking about, we can't take it for granted, and it requires work. It requires our constant energy if we want it to survive. We've heard from experts, from activists in exile. We've heard from people who are striving to build democracy in their own countries. And we can't undervalue the privilege that we have in places where our democracies are longer established, not without fault, not without flaw. I think we really do try to take a humble approach to understanding our own challenges. But we really have something special that's worth defending, and that is worth working on to continuously improve. Democracy is not an end goal. It's a state. I always think of every democracy in development. And for me, we can't take that for granted. We have to continue to push forward and really support those that are working to do that in their own countries as well.
Thank you, and I agree. Thank you for this interview.
My pleasure.
Thank you, viewers, for joining us. And we'll have one more interview to go in, I think, an hour or so. So join us soon.